Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today is Wednesday, August 20th, 2025, and Trump is threatening to nationalize more cities if their mayors and other people who are in charge across the nation in the United States won't enforce the laws, won't force the police to enforce the laws, are openly saying that they're not going to cooperate with ICE and further, poking the administration in the eye, et cetera, et cetera. So Trump, and through Pam Bondi, is responding, and that's interesting. There's a whole lot of Ukraine war stuff, and we're going to start there. Air Canada strikes ending as they reach a tentative agreement, so that's interesting. Man charged. So there's a guy in Nova Scotia. He woke up to an intruder in his house. He beat the intruder up, I guess, used a weapon, maybe a baseball bat. I don't know. We'll read the news article together. But the important part is that he got charged with aggravated assault. If that person didn't break into my house, they would not have been dealt with by me, right? Like, I didn't assault you. I let you live, sir. Like that's a big difference. Maybe I won't make that mistake next time. So we'll talk about that because it's wild, and the crime stuff that's going on in Washington D.C. It is day and night difference. So people are happy about it, but at the same time, how do you make this kind of change permanent? Because you can't just have a police state all the time. Because pretty soon people stop thanking you for their safety and start wondering where their freedom went. Right? 2030 agenda. You have to register your wood burning appliances now in Vancouver or in BC. Yes, you do. And so that's interesting. I'll show you that ordinance. It's a bylaw. And Canada has been shut out of the NATO negotiations, which is embarrassing on the world stage. We are being ignored. And I was talking yesterday how Harper would have been invited to these talks. I think that this is something that Carney himself says, if you're not at the table, you're what's for dinner, right? And so we're not impactful on the world stage. And nothing says that more than being cut out of the latest NATO negotiations. We should have been included, probably, right? But we are not. And that is a big stain on Carney's leadership. But it's funny because I think Trump is rightly ignoring Carney because Carney wouldn't have been an asset to Trump. And other leaders like Keir Starmer are trying to include Carney, but it looks desperate and ridiculous, if you ask me. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, here's Mark Carney saying, when you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So they're eating us for dinner. Here we go.
As a middle power today, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We need to be smarter. We need to focus on our key sectors. We need to create a coherent tax system. We need to train our people to master their machines. We need to build our core competencies from clean energy to compute. And we need to make ourselves the essential trading partner of the United States and our allies.
Whoops. So, we failed on every single one of those, sir. Got any other ideas? You haven't done anything at all. Nothing. Here is true facts. And they say President Trump replaces Mark Carney with a houseplant for a photo op. Nobody notices. I think this is true. No, it's not actually true. It's got to be Photoshop. But still, pretty funny. I thought it was very, very funny. I don't think that's a real picture, by the way. Here is Tom Quiggin. It says, Canada shut out. Carney's absence in Washington is a national humiliation. And this is an editorial on Western Standard News. So people are noticing that Canada's kind of being laughed at, if not completely ignored, right? We're not serious, and we're not being treated as being serious because we're not serious, right? We'd rather talk about the impact on gender or something like that rather than actual real problems. And so now that's having consequences, right? When we go into trade negotiations with Chrystia Freeland wearing a mama's not equal to chopped liver shirt, that's going to have consequences, and that might not show up right away. Because it didn't. Here we are now, right? And James says Canada has a long history of support for Ukraine, including being the first Western nation to recognize their independence, the largest diaspora community in NATO, and starting Op Unifier and Op Reassurance. As a founding member of NATO and G7 country, it's embarrassing to see Canada left out of yesterday's peace discussion with President Zelensky and world leaders. If it was Harper, he would have got into that meeting. He would have been in Washington, just standing outside the White House, just waiting to be let in here. And I don't think he would have been reduced to making himself look that ridiculous, to be very clear. But I think that he would have gotten into that meeting. He would have been there. People would have said, should we invite Stephen Harper? Because, he represents Canada, and that's medium important, at least, to have them here representing, right? Now, we don't matter. We don't. And as founding member of NATO, I didn't mention that yesterday, and a G7 country also matters, right? So founding member of NATO, G7 country, and we're not invited? Man, pretty wild. He's responding. He continues, how can Mark Carney honestly say he knows how the world works when he isn't even in the room? Yep. Absolutely true. This is in response to Toronto Sun article by Brian Lilly. Under Carney, Canada still doesn't matter on the international stage. Canada was left out from the big summit in Washington. Yep. Swing and a miss, right? We didn't actually get to participate because of our leaders' idiocy. Wild. Here is Ryan, and he says, was the media in Canada told not to discuss or bring up the fact that Carney wasn't invited to this because their silence on the matter is deafening? Mark says Canada hasn't joined the EU yet, so that's why we weren't invited, which is ridiculous in consideration of NATO country, G7. We used to be G7. G7 represents the 7 biggest economies in the G7, right? Or in the G20, I guess. But now our economy is 10th or 12th or something like that, and Italy's bigger mover than we are, etc. Italy's there already, but still, like there's all sorts of movement on how much economic activity Canada has. We've fallen a lot, and I don't know that we qualify to be in that group of countries anymore. And so, again, consequences, right? Mark says, by the way, Canada has contributed more money than Italy and Finland combined to the Ukraine war. Also, the United States is not European either. Since we are geographically connected to the United States, it would have been not only acceptable, but expected to have a seat. I think the G7 and NATO stuff and the fact that we've run operations and things like that. And again, I'm not in support of anything like this. I don't think we should be supporting foreign wars. I don't think we should have anything to do with foreign wars. If we weren't supporting foreign wars, the foreign war would probably be finished now. They would have been forced to find a peace agreement because their army would have been defeated. So without all the Western support. So Western support has made this war last much longer. So it's very interesting that Canada is not invited to the peace part, right? We were there for some of the war part, but we're not invited to the peace part. And man, and I think it's because of our behavior. I think it's because the things Canada chooses to prioritize in meetings like this would undermine Trump's goals. So that's the reason it's very practical that we're not there. Here is Mark Nixon highlighting what the CBC is talking about. And we'll stop at one part in this to see if you can spot Mark Carney in the meeting for security assurances for Ukraine. Here we go.
Canada is taking part as we speak this morning in talks aimed at building on developments from that extraordinary White House summit aimed at ending Russia's war in Ukraine. We have some new images of Prime Minister Mark Carney from that conversation this morning, frame grabs from the virtual meeting that was
So here's the frame grab from the virtual meeting. Can you see Mark Carney there? He's got a huge role. There's Keir Starmer, right? And there's well, I don't know. I can't make out anybody in the rest of the screen grab here because the image is not very good. But this is the proof the Canadian media is using to say, look, we're helping. Canada's helping everybody. We're not a laughing stock. Look, we're participating, which is actually kind of more embarrassing than anything else. Here's Mark Carney,
chaired by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron. You can make out the Prime Minister there in the...
See there, we zoomed in. There he is, right there. Oh, right, Mark Carney. Boom, there he is, participating like all the other G7 leaders. Oh, right, oof. Right, pretty brutal. Really, right? Like, and people are wondering, and Mark says, so the Liberals leaked a screen. Mark Patron says the Liberals leaked a screen grab to their CBC mouthpieces to deflect and distract Canadians from this embarrassment after being left out of the DCP summit. No legacy media bothered to ask Carney about it. Truly a sad state of affairs. Yeah. So Mark Nixon said CBC working overtime on damage control after Canada was snubbed in DC. They're pushing a mysterious screenshot to make Mark Carney look relevant. Yes. Look at the screenshot from Keir Starmer's Zoom meeting. Yes, we're definitely relevant on the world stage. No, I don't think so. Sprinter says the U.S. will help coordinate security guarantees for Ukraine, and there is a possibility of providing other means, but there will be no American troops in Ukraine, the White House has said. A good deal on Ukraine requires both sides to be a little dissatisfied, the statement adds. Washington will talk with Moscow about acceptable security guarantees for Ukraine, the White House emphasizes. So there you go, Moscow, and they're in negotiations, but all of these security guarantees, I think that that's a chink in the armor, if you will. Merz was asking for it, like the Chancellor of Germany, I think that's Merz, was asking for it, and he wanted a ceasefire before full peace and things like that. But his specific thing was asking for the guarantees, and I think that there's something about that that's odd to me. It's going to entangle them more, or the guarantees. Trump countered by forcing the European countries to be the ones to give the guarantees, and with support from the United States type deal. So Global News says Ukraine would like to see Canada actively participating in future security guarantees, because we didn't this time because we're dumb. The leadership is dumb. The citizens are victims. Anyway, security guarantees as part of a long-term peace deal, a top diplomat said. Why does Ukraine care? There's so many Ukrainians in Canada? Maybe, but it seems odd to me, right? It seems like a higher level game being played. Like with Canada, there's all those Canadian tax dollars in play, and without Canada, there's none of those Canadian tax dollars in play. That's maybe one higher level game that's going on that's not being talked about. Why doesn't the media talk about that? Why doesn't the media say, our involvement in this has cost this many billions of dollars, maybe we should stop spending this many billions of dollars, 70 billion, 80 billion, something like that. And wouldn't that fix Vancouver, right? What do we get out of this? How is this helping? Does this even go to our NATO bottom line, or is this tangential other spending that doesn't have anything to do with anything? Mark Carney says, this morning I spoke with the leaders of the Coalition of the Willing, because they're all in Washington, D.C., and Mark Carney was meeting with Doug Ford yesterday for no good reason at all, really. He says, we're working closely with President Zelensky and our partners to strengthen the military and financial support for Ukraine and secure lasting peace. He can't even bring himself to say the United States. Like, the United States doesn't, the Coalition of the Willing is who he references? I don't know, man. The whole thing seems carefully chosen words that don't give credit where credit's due. And I don't know, something, there's between the text there, there's subtext there. Here is this guy, and he says, this is iconic. While Trump has NATO leaders and Zelensky in a photo op, he directs their attention to the painting from that horrible day in Butler, Pennsylvania. And all the leaders look like they've just seen a ghost. A little bit. Right? So here's Trump, and he just kind of, well, here he is.
Not a good day. That was not a great day.
I don't know, man. Is Trump just being weird, like with the hats, right? Here's my hat. Do you want to see my wall of hats? I have a whole wall of hats. Let's all go and see my wall of hats. Like, is it weird to do? That's a little weird. I don't know that I would show people my hats. Like, come and see my shoes. Do you want to see all my shoes? Look at all my shoes. I know it's a presidential thing, and look, like, these people all have to run for office, I guess. And so, like, hey, this is a thing we all share. Look how effective I was with my hats. Maybe that's something. But this is Trump being bombastic and like, oh, remember that time I got shot? Weird, right? Or is there some kind of signal here? Is he doing this for these people because he knows something that maybe will come out soon? I have no idea. I genuinely don't know. But it seems like there's layers, right? Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. President Trump has layers. Here is Pam Bondi, and she is talking about the federalizing. No, this is about Ukraine. Here, I believe this is about Ukraine. Here we go.
However, one thing that has absolutely not changed is the media's negative and downright false coverage of President Trump and his foreign policy accomplishments. From the beginning of this entire process, much of the left-wing media has been actively rooting against the President of the United States in the pursuit of peace. Initially, the media ridiculously claimed that President Trump was somehow beholden to Russia for even agreeing to have a face-to-face discussion with President Putin inside of the United States. The media said President Trump was making a grave mistake by, quote, legitimizing Putin. They were aghast that President Trump would treat another world leader like a world leader. The media relentlessly attacked President Trump and claimed he suffered a, quote, major defeat for not immediately emerging with a final agreement, even though he said heading into that meeting, this was a meeting to listen and to understand how to move the ball forward. All weekend following those historic U.S.-Russia bilateral talks, we listened to clueless pundits on television trying but failing to claim that the president had failed. The so-called experts in the foreign policy establishment, whose record is nothing but endless wars, trillions of wasted taxpayer dollars, and dead Americans, have the nerve to try and lecture President Trump, who has solved 7 global conflicts in 7 months, about peace. This is the same president, by the way, who brokered the Abraham Accords in his first term, on top of more than half a dozen other peace deals this year alone, as I just said. We also saw yesterday the president of Ukraine and all of the other major leaders of Europe fly across the Atlantic Ocean to meet President Trump at the White House because of the progress that was made, and that, if you ask the media, failed meeting, but it was not. It was highly productive and it was successful. This is why Americans' trust in the mass media is at a lowest point in more than 5 decades. Diplomacy is a delicate process, and instead of reporting the facts about what is happening here at this White House and what is happening between this president and other leaders around the world, many outlets in this room continue to try to actively undermine the president and sabotage the efforts towards peace.
So the media is trying to sabotage peace, and what's going on with that? And she's calling out the whole press pool, and yeah, she's not wrong. Right? I don't think she's wrong at all. So it is very interesting to watch all of this unfold, and it's interesting to watch the battle between the administration and the press. Is this normal, do you think? Is this a normal back and forth that you normally see? And are we just being overly sensitive to it and saying, oh, this is unprecedented, blah, 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 blah? Or is this something that's unprecedented? Or are we in times that are vastly different than they used to be, and should we pay closer attention than we maybe are? I think it's the second one, personally. Like, I think that we are in unprecedented times, and the things that are going on are vastly outside of what would be expected in a system of government that we run, period. I think that if the citizens ran the system of government, the citizens' priority wouldn't be foreign wars. But that's just one example, right? And so I don't know. I think that we have been bamboozled into allowing something unprecedented to happen. Maybe Trump's fixing it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to wait and see. Let's do our grab bag of governance. And Ryan is saying, it's been 158 days since Mark Carney became prime minister, and he's not signed a single new deal with anyone from any country. All we have gotten is higher tariffs and manufacturing leaving Canada. I didn't realize you could destroy a country in 10 years with enough committed lunatics. Yeah, yep. This is 5 minutes. This guy's talking about this. So link is in the description if you're interested. Pierre Polyv is talking about Battle River Crowfoot. And he says, thank you, Battle River Crowfoot. I will fight for you every day. So he's back in the House of Commons, and we'll see where all of that goes. Donald Best says, Pierre Polyev's victory changes nothing. The CPC back liberal tyranny. They voted for C5, and they allowed the throne speech to pass on division. They support immigration floods, mRNA. They support censorship and endless wars, and laws that jail parents for opposing child mutilation. Albertans voted for submission to their Ottawa masters. So that's, I think that's not far off, unfortunately. Here's Bradshaw, and she says, Pierre has only been the official MP for Battle River Crowfoot for just under a day, and he has not 1 but 2 constituency offices open, and Mark Carney has been MP for almost 4 months and still doesn't have an office. Well, if you put an office up, then people will protest it. I think that's what's going on. So I don't know. We'll see. Ryan Garrettson says Rogers Stadium and Scotiabank Arena and Canada's Wonderland are just some of the places that refuse to accept cash as a form of payment anywhere on the property. It should be illegal for businesses to refuse cash as a form of payment. So yeah, and I wonder how many other businesses are doing that. It seems when I was younger, my friend's dad owned a business, and he was talking about this, and he said they'll never, like, a business would have to be stupid to not accept a customer's money if that money is cash, if it's legal tender, right? Like, and if it's not inconvenient, right? If somebody comes up to pay $100 in pennies and wants to count out the pennies in front of you, there may be ulterior motives there, right? But without those kind of modifiers, if somebody comes up and says, here's money, and they have to be crazy to not accept it. it not being counterfeit and things like that. I don't think that was as big a deal. This was before there was a big counterfeiting ring happening in Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph area in the mid 90s. This was before that. But even then, right? Even then, his fundamental argument was businesses will go where the money is. And if the money's in cash, they'll take it. And that's weird because this flies in the face of that. Because I thought that was I thought that was a statement full of wisdom. I was like, oh yeah, that does make sense, right? But apparently not. Apparently businesses now, they want a ledger. They want everything dotted and crossed, etc. It streamlines the payments, but it also adds a 3% levy to all payments, right? So have they increased their prices to counteract that? Because if you're only paying with cards, then the person who runs the cards infrastructure, all that other stuff, they take a rip off the top, right? So it's 3% usually, right? So MasterCard takes a lot more. I think it's 5%, maybe 6%. So how does the business deal with that? But at the same time, no counterfeits maybe, but then they get chargebacks. So I don't know. What do you think about the cashless society we're being forced into? Here's the last story before I've got to cut the stream. And if you want to watch the whole show, head over to CanadaPoly.com, or you can sign up on Spotify for the whole stream and Substack for the whole stream. And where's another one? I can't remember the other one. Locals is the other one. But CanadaPoly.com, if you want to just get it directly from me on my website, that is where to go. I realized yesterday that I haven't been telling anybody at the end of the stream. I added on when I do the editing and I uploaded the short version, but that doesn't actually get to YouTube anymore. Anyway, I digress. Here is in Vancouver, they are outlawing fireplaces, residential fireplaces. So residential indoor wood burning bylaw 1303/2020. The bylaw applies to indoor wood burning devices such as fireplaces, wood stoves, and furnaces. You can still burn indoors, but what and how you burn might change. Oh, what you need to do, register your wood burning device. If you live in an urban area, register your wood